Hey everybody, I just wanted to have a quick wrap up for the end of the week. And I want to do a couple of things. I just want to go over the answers to the comprehension questions that we had applied to the key readings for this week. And I also just want to just give you some updates on how to progress as the weeks go forward. But the first thing I want to do before I get to what was the readings about, I just want to say thanks. The semester has kicked off in a terrific way. This is the first time I'm using Perusal, and your interactions with Perusal have gone way above what I was expecting, and I'm really happy about that. The levels of engagement are really pleasing. They're really interesting. I'm kind of having to be careful about balancing my time teaching this unit as against the other things that I have to do as part of my work for the university, because it's just really interesting. It's really easy to get lost in your comments and questions that you've been asking around the key reading, and that's really great. So I hope we can move forward from that. But let's go on and kind of just talk a little bit more about feedback. Oh yeah, one thing I do want to say is that the engagement with Perusal has been so good that I'm a little bit concerned that that I might miss some things. I might get a bit overwhelmed. So I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. If you've got a question that you very specifically want me to answer, could you just note me, put at Andy Ruddock, and that way it makes sure that I don't miss anything. Okay, because there has been a lot of traffic. Long may that continue. I think that's fantastic, but I just don't want to miss anything. So let's get to, I guess, my answers, having been over some of your questions and your comments and all of those sorts of things. And I suppose what I want to do is kind of step back and give a big picture on that reading. And I want to just talk through what the authors were assuming about the nature of media effects, or the sorts of hypotheses they were testing, and why they set about doing the study that they did, particularly regarding their sampling strategies. So I suppose one of the things is that what they were doing first is they were trying to test the idea that media fiction, media constructions affect our engagement with the real world, and they were trying to do that by selecting a very specific sample of people. So they actually weren't trying to select a sample of people, they were selecting a very particular, one might even say peculiar, group of people who were in a social situation where one can reasonably theoretically expect the disparity between media reality and social reality to be something that actually had an impact on those people's social experience. So why did they select prisoners? Well, and why did they select Belgian prisoners? Well, we've got people who are going into a new situation for the first time, and we can be reasonably sure that those people's only prior experience with that social situation is through the media. But secondly, we can also be reasonably sure that that media exposure is going to be quite different from what the actual social experience is going to be like. Why? Well, because of the predominance of global American TV. So we could be fairly sure, the authors could be fairly sure, that people in Belgium going to prison for the first time will have been exposed to television prisons that aren't from Belgium. And so this was a case study where, by looking at this particular group of people, we were able to examine the real social effects of finding yourself in a social situation which is very different from the way that that situation has been modeled for you by drama. Okay, and so what that does is it allows us a setting whereby we're able to see how media narratives become a factor in how people orientate themselves to their new social situation. And importantly, in the questions, we don't particularly ask about television because, excuse me, because the goal is to see how, excuse me again, sorry, the goal is to see how people voluntarily relate their social experience to things that they've seen in the media. So the danger is if you ask them, so you're in prison, is it like you expected from based on TV? Then you're leading people to talk about television where that's not something that they would have thought of their own volition. And again, there are reasons to think that that these prisoners would be making a comparison between a very different media reality and their social reality. And then what are some of the ways in which it's assumed that people are affected by media fiction? Now, the point I want to make here is I want to kind of cut through some of the accounts they give to a bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture is that one of the reasons why television drama is seen to be particularly effective in terms of helping people make real world judgments is because it quite often presents sort of ideas about the social world in ways which are easily retrievable because they are dramatic and easy to understand. So, for example, if you think about the comparison between a news story and a drama, it's quite often that information from a drama is easier to recall than information from a news story because a drama presents information. And again, we're talking about, if you think about dramas about cop shows, law shows, medical shows, quite often those shows will be at pains to make sure that the issues that they are dealing with do reflect things that happen in the real world. So if you are, for example, you are doing a medical drama about a particular disease, most of the time people will try and make sure that they get the dynamics about that disease, what causes it, what happens to people who suffer from it, and how it's treated. Those things need to be right in the drama. Even if everything else is made up, those things need to be right. And one of the reasons why that means that those dramas become a source for information is that we are watching these, we're receiving this information in a narrative context. So it has a story that tells us not only what a disease is, how it happens and how it's treated, but what it does to people that we care about. When we watch TV dramas, we empathize with the characters because we know them in some depth in ways that is not true of real world footage for the news, for example. So the idea is that one of the reasons why fictional drama becomes the basis for real world judgments is that we know a couple of things. Firstly, we know that quite often when it comes to courts or cops or hospitals, that producers have probably done some work to try and make sure that that while the people and the stories aren't real, the issues that are dealt with are kind of, there is some effort put into making them faithful to the real world. But then the other thing is that they're quite easy to store and retrieve. They're easy to understand. It's easier to understand a story than it is to understand a fact. So when you suddenly find yourself confronted with that disease or that situation, it's simply that the memories that we generate or the knowledge that we generate in relation to media fiction is easier to retrieve and deploy. Now, I've got a very, very strange example that I'm a bit embarrassed about for my own life, which is from the birth of my daughter. And without going into too many, well, I can't really do it without going into too many details. My daughter was delivered via C-section. It was an emergency, and the procedure involved seeing a lot of stuff, a lot of blood and guts. And I recall at one point of the whole experience, actually reflecting on, I saw something and my mind immediately went to a scene from a movie that I'd seen which depicted a similar situation, and I immediately went, oh, isn't it interesting? In my head I thought, isn't it interesting, this looks exactly like it did on that movie. And that just happened instantly. So obviously that movie, it had a very graphic image in it that I was able to recall simply because it stuck with me so long, because it was actually a movie that I'd really engaged with. So yeah, I'm not proud about that, but that's an example of the sorts of processes that we're talking about. But then the other thing, of course, is that quite often people will be. So we kind of have this idea that ideas are these ideas are easy to retrieve, and so quite often, I mean, it can be the case that we might retrieve these ideas and forget where we got them from and mistake fact for fiction. But more often than not, it's the case, and in the case with the Belgian prisoners, it's not the fact that they were forgetting that what they'd seen was a fiction. It was simply the fact that that was the most retrievable information that was going to allow them to reflect on and develop a sense of, and develop a language to talk about what was about to happen to them. So they knew that what they'd seen didn't have anything to do with the situation they were in, but it nevertheless became a kind of a device, a concept that they could use to at least begin to organize their thinking, and also organise the way that they talked about and related to their particular process, their particular experience. So the really interesting thing about it is that these prisoners felt that these sorts of prison narratives that were fictional were having an impact on the way that they perceived and understood their social situation, even when they knew that the information they were retrieving was fictional. So this is kind of an interesting thing, because what it means is that media have some power over our discussions about the nature of social reality, even when we know that what we're seeing is a fiction. This is a really powerful idea that we can take forward. So those are the main ideas that I want you to get out from the readings. And if I can just say that people are doing an absolutely terrific job in the discussions of carrying these things over to developing other sorts of topics that are very much related to the same sorts of concepts. So, how do dramas shape expectations about teenage life, or the way that courts work, or about gender? All of these things, all of these sorts of projects, which you can find and read about in this week's discussion forum, are very much in keeping with the idea that we have been working with this week. And so you're already on one step. You've already made the first step in being able to identify a research topic that relates to media themes. So that's terrific. I'm really, really pleased with how you started off. Just one thing, as I've just mentioned, the one thing that I am concerned about, though, is that I might miss your questions, and then you might feel justifiably angry because you put all of this effort into making a question and then I haven't responded to it. If you can mark your, obviously you'll be working with your tutors, and your tutors are great, and so Verity, Luke and Emma will be responding to your questions, and quite often I've left them because they're super smart people and they've given you good answers. But if you specifically wanted input from me, just mark @AndyRuddock. And the last thing, the tech doesn't work, help. Yeah, look, I'm getting a few people who are saying they're having a hard time accessing perusal. A couple of things. Firstly, make sure you're doing it via your Okta Authkate via your Monash email. That's source of the problem in some ways. After that, I'm afraid I'm struggling. So if you're having deeper technical issues, can I ask you to contact eSolutions? Because I just, some of the back-end technical stuff, I'm afraid I just don't know, okay? But at any rate, Well done again. It's been a fantastic first week. Hope those things answer your questions. I'll be doing this every week, giving a wrap up, going over the readings. But keep it up, everyone. It's been a really, really good start. Thank you very much. All right. Have a good weekend. See you.